Her own mother raised a champagne flute in front of 300 guests and toasted to the daughter, who tried her best despite her unfortunate circumstances. The circumstances being her body. The unfortunate part being that she existed. What none of them knew, not the mother with her poisoned smile, not the father counting his stolen millions, not the golden sister smirking beside her stolen fiancé, was that the most dangerous man on the eastern seaboard had already signed a contract in blood claiming her as his. And he was standing in the shadows of that very ballroom, watching every cruel word, deciding exactly how slowly he was going to burn her family's empire to the ground. The Whitmore estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, glittered like a jewel box that Saturday evening in late September. 240 acres of manicured lawns stretched down toward Long Island Sound, dotted with white pavilions and strings of Edison bulbs that made the whole property look like a fever dream of old money excess. The main house, a limestone Georgian mansion built in 1912 by Isabella Whitmore's great-grandfather with railroad money and questionable land deals, hummed with the arrival of 300 of the Northeast's most powerful families. Rolls-Royces and Bentleys crunched up the crushed shell driveway. Uniformed valets in white gloves moved with the silent precision of a military drill team. Somewhere inside, a 40-piece orchestra was warming up on the mezzanine balcony, tuning to a low, luxurious hum that vibrated through the marble floors. Isabella Whitmore stood in front of the antique cheval mirror in her childhood bedroom on the third floor, and for the first time in 29 years, she almost believed she was beautiful. She was 29 years old, a senior forensic accountant at Kingsley, Vance & Associates in Midtown Manhattan, with 3 graduate degrees, a photographic memory for numbers, and a body that took up space in a world engineered to make women vanish. She was a size 20. She was 258 pounds. She had soft, generous curves that filled every doorway, full hips that swayed when she walked, a heavy bust she usually hid beneath oversized cashmere cardigans, and thick, dimpled thighs she had spent 2 decades apologizing for. Her dark chestnut hair fell past her shoulders in loose waves. Her eyes were a startling pale gray, the color of a winter sea, framed by lashes so long they cast small shadows on her cheeks. She had a full mouth, a soft round face, and a small silver scar above her left eyebrow from the night she had fallen off her bicycle at 7 years old, and her mother had told her, in front of the emergency room nurse, that this was what happened to clumsy, fat little girls. Tonight she looked at herself in the sapphire blue Valentino gown her personal shopper had spent 4 months altering, and something fragile and dangerous fluttered inside her chest. Hope. The dress was a masterpiece of restrained sensuality, floor-length silk crepe, in a shade so deep it looked almost black in low light. It had a modest sweetheart neckline that framed her décolletage without exposing it, a corseted bodice that cinched her waist into an hourglass, and a full sweeping skirt that celebrated the flare of her hips rather than hiding them. Around her throat sat the only piece of jewelry she owned that had belonged to her grandmother, a single teardrop sapphire on a fine platinum chain, the last gift she had received from a woman who had loved her without conditions before dying of a stroke when Bella was 14. "You look beautiful, Miss Isabella." Bella turned. Rosa, the family's head housekeeper, stood in the doorway holding a small silver tray with a glass of ice water. Rosa was 63 years old, had worked at the Whitmore estate for 31 years, and was the only person in the house who had ever hugged Bella without commenting on how much of her there was to hold. "You think so?" Bella asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know so, Mija." Rosa set down the tray and crossed the room, taking Bella's soft hands in her own weathered ones. "Your grandmother would have wept to see you tonight. You look like a queen." Bella's eyes stung. She blinked rapidly, refusing to ruin the makeup that had taken the artist 90 minutes to perfect. "Mother wanted me to wear black. She said the sapphire was too much attention for a night that belongs to Vivian." Rosa's mouth tightened into a line that Bella had come to recognize over the years as the specific expression of a woman biting back 3 decades of accumulated opinions about the Whitmore family. "Tonight belongs to whoever walks into that ballroom and takes it, Miss Isabella. You remember that. You remember whose granddaughter you are." The engagement party downstairs was ostensibly a celebration of Bella's younger sister Vivian's engagement to Preston Ashford Blackwell III, the heir to a Boston pharmaceutical fortune. In reality, it was the culmination of 6 months of increasingly cruel humiliations that Bella had endured in silence because she had learned, at 7 years old with a bloody forehead and a mother who wouldn't hold her, that silence was the only currency her family accepted from her. Vivian was 25, a former Miss Connecticut runner-up, blonde and lean in the specific, engineered way of women who lived on Pilates and Pinot Grigio. She had gotten engaged to Preston in June. Preston, 3 years earlier, had asked Bella out on a single dinner date and then never called her again after seeing her order a full entree at Daniel instead of the salad he had suggested. Bella had cried herself sick for a week. 2 years later, Vivian had introduced Preston as her new boyfriend at Easter brunch, laughing as she said, "Can you believe he barely remembers meeting you, Bella? Isn't that funny?" Nobody at the table had corrected her, not their father Thomas, who had glanced up from his newspaper only to comment on the weather, not their mother Catherine, who had smiled tightly and asked Vivian about the wedding venue, not Preston himself, who had looked at Bella across the table with the exact bland politeness a man reserves for the waitstaff. Bella had eaten one bite of her eggs Benedict and excused herself. She had spent the rest of that Sunday afternoon on the floor of her Upper West Side apartment, sobbing into her rescue dog Wilson's fur, promising herself she would never come back to Greenwich again. She had come back 6 times since. Because Catherine Whitmore had a way of making refusals feel like knives, and Thomas Whitmore controlled the trust fund that had paid for Bella's graduate education. And every time Bella tried to build a life beyond her family's reach, they found a way to pull her back into the poison circle they called love. Downstairs, an orchestra began playing Vivaldi. The party was starting. Bella took one last look in the mirror. She smoothed the sapphire silk down over her hips. She lifted her chin. Then she followed Rosa out of the bedroom and toward the grand staircase, unaware that 11 floors of destiny were about to collide with her in a ballroom she had walked into 1,000 times. The Whitmore ballroom was the size of a small chapel. Vaulted ceilings soared 30 feet overhead, painted with a 19th century mural of Greek goddesses that Catherine Whitmore had once compared unfavorably to her elder daughter. The floors were imported Carrara marble, polished to a mirror finish. Chandeliers dripping with baccarat crystal cast the entire room in a warm, golden light that made every diamond in the crowd flash like a small captured star. Round tables draped in ivory silk seated 10 each, set with Wedgwood china and Christoffel silver. In the center of the room, a small raised dais held the ice sculpture Catherine had commissioned specifically for the evening. Twin swans with their necks entwined into the shape of a heart, carved by a Japanese artist flown in from Kyoto for the weekend. Bella descended the grand staircase alone. She had asked her father to escort her weeks ago, and Thomas Whitmore had looked at his phone and said, "I'll be busy greeting the Blackwell family, Princess. Just come down when you're ready, Princess." He had not called her that with any warmth since she was 8 years old and won a spelling bee. Now it was a word he threw at her, the way a man tosses a coin to a beggar. Heads turned as she reached the landing. Not many, just enough. A group of women near the Champagne Tower stopped mid-conversation to look. Bella recognized them, all of them, from 29 years of holiday parties and Christmas galas and summer regattas. Marjorie Blackwell, Preston's mother, in champagne-colored Oscar de la Renta. Constance Havmeyer, whose son had briefly dated Bella in college before being told by his mother that Bella's figure was inappropriate for the family legacy. Amelia Sinclair, who had once handed Bella a diet pamphlet at Vivian's 21st birthday party. They looked at Bella now, in her sapphire silk with her sapphire teardrop and her hair loose down her back, and Bella watched the tiny, involuntary shift in each of their faces. Surprise. Reassessment. Something almost like resentment. She had never looked like this before. She had always come to these parties in black or navy, in draped fabrics designed to conceal, in the specific, defeated posture of a woman who had accepted that she would never be looked at with anything but tolerance. Tonight, she had walked in and taken up space. And the women who had built their entire social identities on being thinner than Isabella Whitmore did not know what to do with it. There she is, Vivian's voice cut through the murmur like a blade wrapped in silk. Bella turned. Her sister was gliding toward her across the marble, radiant in a strapless white Monique Lhuillier gown that made her look like a bride 2 years early. Vivian was 5'10", 115 pounds, and possessed the specific brittle beauty of women who had learned that hunger was the price of being loved. Her platinum hair was swept into a chignon. Diamonds the size of tic-tacs glittered at her ears. Preston walked half a step behind her, tall and blonde and vacant, holding a glass of champagne he clearly did not intend to share. Bella. Vivian caught her by the shoulders and air-kissed both her cheeks, a performance for the watching crowd. Her voice dropped to a hiss meant only for Bella's ears. "What are you wearing? You look like a fat mermaid." Bella's throat closed. She had prepared herself for the entire drive up from Manhattan for whatever her family would say tonight. She had rehearsed responses in the mirror. She had practiced holding her face still. But 3 words in, and the old, familiar hollowing had already begun in her chest. That specific sinking that happened when the people who were supposed to love you first were also the people who had cut you deepest. "Hello, Vivian." Her voice came out steady. She was proud of that. "You look lovely." "I always do." Vivian stepped back and slid her arm through Preston's. "Preston, darling, say hello to my big sister." The word big landed exactly as intended. Preston gave Bella a small, distant smile. "Isabella, good to see you again." "Preston." She met his eyes and did not smile back. He had the grace to look away first. "Mother wants to see you before the toasts," Vivian said, already turning away, already bored. "She's near the ice sculpture. Do try not to knock it over." Vivian floated off in a cloud of Chanel No. 5 and cruelty. Preston followed. Bella stood alone at the base of the staircase for one long moment, feeling the weight of 200 eyes and 100 whispered assessments settle on her shoulders like a lead cloak. Then she squared those shoulders and walked, with as much dignity as she could summon, across the ballroom toward the ice sculpture where her mother waited. Catherine Whitmore was 61 years old and looked 45. She had achieved this through a combination of Swiss dermatologists, French pharmaceuticals, and the specific preservative effect of never allowing joy or shame or fear to move her facial muscles for more than 3 seconds at a time. Tonight she wore emerald green Dior, 3 strands of graduated pearls, and the diamond and emerald bracelet Bella's father had given her on their 30th anniversary. She was talking to Marjorie Blackwell when Bella approached, and she did not turn her head to acknowledge her elder daughter for a full 45 seconds. Bella counted. She always counted. It was the accountant in her, or maybe just the survivor. "Mother." Catherine turned. Her pale gray eyes, the eyes she had passed down to Bella like a curse, swept from Bella's face to her shoulders, to her waist to her hips, and back up. Her mouth compressed into the specific tight line that Bella had learned, at approximately 4 years old, meant disappointment. "Isabella." Catherine's voice was cool, cultured, weaponized. "You made it. And in blue. How adventurous. I thought it looked nice with grandmother's necklace. Catherine's eyes flicked to the sapphire teardrop at Bella's throat and then away, as if the sight of it caused her physical discomfort. Which it might have. Catherine had never gotten along with her mother-in-law, a woman who had once told her, at Bella's christening, that she hoped little Isabella grew up to be nothing like her mother. "Well, the Blackwells are here. Try not to embarrass your sister tonight, Isabella. This evening is very important to her, and Preston's family has been so generous in accepting our little quirks." Our little quirks. The phrase hit exactly where Catherine had aimed it. Bella was the quirk. Bella had always been the quirk. In a family of thoroughbreds, she was the draft horse the Whitmores had somehow produced and could not quite bring themselves to send to the glue factory. "I'll try, Mother. Good girl. Now go find your father. He's near the bar with the Ashfords." And Isabella. Catherine reached out and with 2 fingers adjusted the neckline of Bella's gown a full inch higher. Her nails were the color of dried blood. "Do try to eat lightly tonight. You know how the photographs come out." Bella walked away. She did not cry. She did not run. She walked, 1 foot in front of the other, across the marble floor, past the champagne tower, past a string quartet playing Debussy, past 100 assessing eyes, until she reached the far side of the ballroom, where a set of French doors opened onto the stone terrace overlooking the Sound. She pushed through them into the cool September night, closed the doors behind her, walked to the balustrade, gripped the cold limestone with both hands, and finally, let herself breathe. The Sound was black glass under a rising moon. Somewhere out in the darkness, a sailboat's running lights blinked red and green. The salt air was cold and clean, and it did not smell like Chanel No. 5 or her mother's contempt. Bella closed her eyes and let 2 tears fall, exactly 2, because she had a lifetime of practice at rationing her grief in public spaces. That is a very expensive dress to be crying in. The voice came from her left. Low, gravelly, cultured, faintly accented with something European that was not quite Italian and not quite anything else. Bella's eyes snapped open. She turned. He was leaning against the far end of the balustrade, half in shadow, half in the golden light spilling out from the ballroom windows. 6'3" at least. Broad shoulders that filled out a bespoke midnight blue 3-piece suit with a kind of precision that only came from Seville Row tailors who had spent 30 years learning a client's body. Dark hair, nearly black, threaded with the faintest silver at the temples. A jaw that could have been carved by a Renaissance sculptor on his best day. And eyes, she saw them clearly as he stepped forward into the light. Eyes so dark they looked almost black, set deep beneath heavy brows, watching her with an intensity that made her stomach drop straight through the terrace stones and into the earth beneath. He was holding a crystal tumbler of amber liquid in one gloved hand. The glove was calfskin, thin, black. His other hand held a lit cigarette, which he now lifted to his mouth and drew on slowly, the ember flaring red in the darkness. He exhaled a slow stream of smoke that curled away toward the Sound. "I'm sorry," Bella said, her voice not quite steady. She wiped her cheek quickly with the back of her hand. "I didn't realize anyone was out here. I'll go." "Stay." It was not a request. It was not quite an order. It was something in between, a word placed carefully in the air between them like a chess piece on a board he had been playing for a very long time. Bella found, to her own confusion, that she did not move. "Do I know you?" she asked. The stranger smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was slow and deliberate, and it did not reach his eyes, which continued to watch her with that same unsettling stillness. "No, Miss Whitmore. You do not know me, but I know you very well indeed." Ice slid down Bella's spine. She took an involuntary step backward, her hand closing around the sapphire at her throat. "I'm sorry, but who are you?" He took another slow drag on the cigarette, then dropped it and ground it out beneath the polished toe of a shoe that had probably cost more than Bella's monthly rent. He straightened. He walked toward her, and he moved the way large predators moved in nature documentaries, quiet, economical, entirely aware of the space around him. "My name is Dante Ricci." He stopped 3 feet from her, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something dark and expensive, bergamot and black pepper, and something else she could not name. "I run certain businesses on the eastern seaboard. Perhaps you have heard the name." She had. God help her, she had. Her hands had been in her father's financial records for 6 years. She was a forensic accountant. She had traced the flow of the Whitmore family money through so many shell companies and offshore accounts that she could recite the routing numbers of half of them from memory. And in the deepest, darkest layers of her father's ledger, in the section of the family accounts he thought no one could see, she had encountered the name Ricci more than once. Ricci Holdings, Ricci Maritime, Ricci and Associates. And once, in a personal note her father had scrawled in the margin of a document he had left on his desk 2 Christmases ago, 3 words in her father's spidery handwriting that she had photographed with her phone, and then spent the next 2 years pretending she had not seen. "Oh, Ricci everything." "Mr. Ricci," she said carefully. "What are you doing at my sister's engagement party?" Dante Ricci tilted his head slightly. The smile deepened, and this time something did enter his eyes, something dark and hungry and terrifyingly patient. "Miss Whitmore, I am not here for your sister's engagement. I am here for you. I have been here for you for a very long time. I simply thought tonight was the night you were finally ready to meet me." Bella stared at the man standing 3 feet away from her on the terrace of her family's estate, and every ounce of forensic training in her body screamed at her to run. She did not run. Something in the way Dante Ricci held himself, some quiet authority that lived in the set of his shoulders and the stillness of his hands, told her that running from this man would be the single most pointless act of her life. He would find her. He had already found her. He had, apparently, been finding her for a very long time. "I don't understand," she said, and she was proud that her voice remained steady even as her pulse hammered against the sapphire at her throat. "What do you mean you have been here for me?" Dante Ricci reached into the inner pocket of his midnight blue suit and withdrew a slim leather billfold. He opened it, extracted a single folded sheet of cream-colored paper, and offered it to her across the space between them. His gloved hand did not tremble. His dark eyes did not leave her face. "Read it, Miss Whitmore. I think you will recognize the signature." Bella took the paper. Her fingers brushed his gloved ones for the briefest instant, and something like an electric current jumped between them, a static shock that she felt in her teeth and in the small of her back, and in places she had not allowed herself to feel anything in years. She unfolded the paper. She read. It was a contract, a binding financial agreement, drawn up by a firm of attorneys in Zurich, dated the 14th of March, 7 months ago. The parties named were Thomas Alexander Whitmore of Greenwich, Connecticut, and Dante Salvatore Ricci of New York, New York. The subject of the agreement was a debt in the amount of 42 million United States dollars, principal and accrued interest, owed by the former to the latter. The terms of resolution were detailed in 3 paragraphs of dense legal language. In lieu of liquidation of Whitmore family assets, in lieu of public disclosure, in lieu of criminal referral to the Securities and Exchange Commission for the specific violations detailed in Appendix C, the debtor Thomas Alexander Whitmore agreed to transfer, cede, and formally deliver into the guardianship and eventual marriage of Dante Salvatore Ricci, one Isabella Catherine Whitmore, his elder daughter, aged 29, upon a date to be determined at the sole discretion of the aforementioned Ricci. The paper trembled in her hands. Her father's signature was at the bottom, in the same spidery handwriting she had recognized in the margin 2 Christmases ago. Beside it, in a bold, decisive black hand, was the signature of Dante Ricci. And beneath both signatures, notarized and stamped in red, was the seal of a private banking authority in Switzerland that Bella recognized because she had spent 3 months of her life trying to trace it through 6 layers of shell corporations that her father had constructed specifically to hide the trail. She looked up. Dante was watching her, and for the first time since he had stepped into the light, something in his expression softened, just fractionally, just at the corners of his mouth and his eyes. "He sold me." Her voice came out as barely a whisper. "My father sold me. Yes. For $42 million. Yes. To settle a debt I did not incur. Yes." Bella took a slow, careful breath. She refolded the paper along its original creases. She held it out to him. He took it back and returned it to his billfold with the same unhurried precision he had used to remove it. She turned away from him and walked 3 steps to the balustrade and gripped the cold limestone until her knuckles went white. The sound was still black glass. The sailboat's running lights were still blinking red and green. Somewhere behind her in the ballroom, an orchestra was playing Debussy for 300 people who thought they were watching a normal engagement party. Her sister was inside, laughing at a joke she had probably not understood. Her mother was inside, adjusting the necklines of women who had disappointed her. Her father was inside, pretending, for the 7,000th time in his life, that he was not a monster wearing a Tom Ford tuxedo. And on this terrace, alone with the sound of her own breathing and the smell of bergamot cologne and the impossible cold weight of the truth pressing down on her chest, Isabella Whitmore finally understood something that had been trying to reach her for 6 years. She had never been the disappointment her family accused her of being. She had been the collateral. She had been the ledger entry. She had been, from the moment she developed the ability to look at a spreadsheet and see what her father was actually doing, the single most dangerous liability in the Whitmore family portfolio. And the entire architecture of her parents' cruelty toward her had been designed for exactly one purpose: to keep her small, to keep her ashamed, to keep her so busy hating her own body that she never turned the full force of her intelligence on the numbers she had been trained since childhood to understand better than anyone else in that house. She laughed. It came out low and broken, and it surprised her more than it seemed to surprise the man behind her. Miss Whitmore. He knew. She spoke to the black water. She did not turn around. My father knew. All these years. He knew what I could see in his books. And he needed me small so I would not look. He needed me convinced I was nothing, so I would not realize I was the only person in that house who could bury him. Yes. And my mother helped him. Every insult, every diet pamphlet, every comment about my weight at Thanksgiving. It was strategy. Yes. And my sister. Your sister is a small, stupid woman raised by two large stupid ones. She does not know what she is. She is only what she was taught to be, which is a weapon pointed at you. Bella turned. Dante had not moved. He stood exactly where he had stood before, 3 feet away, his gloved hands folded in front of him, his dark eyes steady on her face. He had allowed her the time to break. He had allowed her the time to understand. He had not filled the silence with reassurances or explanations. He had simply waited, and there was something in the quality of that waiting, the sheer patient absoluteness of it, that told her this man had been waiting for her for longer than 7 months. How long? She asked. He understood the question. He always seemed to understand the question. I first saw you on the 23rd of March, 2 years ago. You were on 5th Avenue, outside the plaza. It was raining. There was a woman sleeping in a doorway with a small dog, and the doorman was attempting to move her along. You stopped. You took off your own coat, a black wool coat, Max Mara, and you put it around the woman. You gave her the umbrella you were carrying. You gave her every bill in your wallet. You walked away in the rain in a cream cashmere sweater that became transparent by the time you reached the corner. And you did not once look back to see if anyone was watching. I was watching. I was in the back of a car, across the street. I had been watching your father's building for other reasons entirely. And I saw you, Isabella. I saw you in the rain giving away your coat to a stranger, and I have not, in the 2 years since, been able to see anyone else. She could not speak. Her throat had closed entirely. She remembered the day. She remembered the woman, whose name was Delphine, who had thanked her in French. She remembered walking the 11 blocks back to her office, soaked through and shivering, and she remembered nobody at Kingsley, Vance and Associates asking her why she was wet, because nobody at Kingsley, Vance and Associates had ever really seen her at all. Dante had seen her, a man she had never met, a man whose name lived in the shadows of her father's illegal ledgers, a man who by every rational metric she should have been terrified of, had seen her from the back of a black car on a rainy afternoon 2 years ago, and had not, in his own words, been able to see anyone else since. I do not know what to do with that information, she whispered. You do not have to do anything with it. Not tonight. You bought me. I bought your father's debt. I did not buy you. There is a difference, and I need you to understand it before this evening goes any further. Your father signed that contract because he believed I would take you as payment. I signed that contract because it was the only mechanism by which I could stand on this terrace tonight and give you the truth without your father having me killed for approaching you. The contract is a leash on him, Isabella. It has never been a leash on you. If you walked off this terrace tonight and told me you never wanted to see me again, I would burn that contract in front of you and disappear from your life forever. Your father's debt would remain his problem. His crimes would remain his crimes. And you would be, for the first time in your life, free. She looked at him. He was telling the truth. She had spent 6 years reading balance sheets and interrogating executives for a living, and she knew, with the same certainty that she knew her own name, that the man in front of her was telling the truth. And if I don't walk off the terrace? She asked. Something moved in his dark eyes. Not triumph. Not relief. Something older. Something more dangerous. Something she suspected he had been carrying since a rainy afternoon on 5th Avenue 2 years ago. Then, Isabella, I will spend the rest of my life proving to you that being seen by me is the safest place a woman like you can ever stand. The French doors behind her burst open. Bella jumped. golden light and orchestral music, and the smell of expensive perfume spilled out onto the terrace. And with them came the specific shrill voice that had been calibrating cruelty at Bella's expense for 29 years. Isabella, there you are. Mother has been looking for you. The toasts are about to start, and you cannot possibly be hiding out here in the dark like some kind of... Vivian stopped. She had taken 3 steps onto the terrace before her eyes adjusted to the darkness. And now they had. And now she saw the man standing 3 feet from her sister, and every drop of blood in Vivian Whitmore's face drained straight down into the marble beneath her white Monique Lewillier gown. Vivian did not know finance. Vivian did not read ledgers. But Vivian had grown up in the same house as Bella, and Vivian had heard the name Ricci exactly once in her life, 3 years ago, when their father had been drunk on Christmas Eve and had muttered something across the dinner table that Catherine had shut down with a single hissed word. And Vivian, whatever else she was not stupid. She could read a room. And the room she was reading right now, in the specific stillness of the man in the midnight blue suit and the specific stillness of her older sister standing beside him, told her that something had shifted in the geometry of the Whitmore universe, and that Vivian Whitmore was suddenly not the center of it. Who, Vivian began, and had to swallow, and began again. Who is your friend, Bella? Dante turned his head, slowly, and looked at Vivian. He did not speak. He did not smile. He simply looked at her, and the effect was the same effect Bella had felt when he first turned those eyes on her, except Vivian did not have the buffer of 2 years of unknowing observation to soften the impact. Vivian flinched. Her hand went to the diamond at her throat. Preston Ashford Blackwell III, who had followed his fiancée onto the terrace 1 polite step behind her, stopped moving entirely. I am not her friend, Dante said quietly. I am her fiancé. Introduce yourself, Miss Whitmore. Vivian opened her mouth. No sound came out. Vivian. Bella's voice cut across the terrace, and something in the sound of it made both her sister and Preston turn. It was a voice Bella had never used before in the Whitmore house. It was the voice of a woman who had, in the last 4 minutes, finally understood the ground she was standing on. This is Mr. Dante Ricci. Mr. Ricci, this is my younger sister, Vivian, and her fiancé, Preston Blackwell. Mr. Blackwell. Dante inclined his head 1 fractional inch, exactly the amount of respect a king might extend to a footman who had brought the wine. Miss Whitmore, it is unfortunate that we are meeting under these circumstances. I had intended to introduce myself formally to your family later this evening, but since you have found us here, perhaps we may proceed together. Isabella. He turned to her and offered his arm, the crook of his elbow angled toward her with the specific old-world formality of a man who had grown up in a house where such gestures were still taught. Shall we go inside? I believe your mother is expecting me. Bella looked at his offered arm. She looked at her sister, who was still staring at Dante with the specific horror of a small predator that has just realized it wandered into the territory of a much larger one. She looked at Preston, who was so pale he had begun to sway. She thought about the last 29 years. She thought about every diet pamphlet her mother had handed her at a birthday party. She thought about Preston not calling her back after the entree at Daniel. She thought about her grandmother, dead 15 years, who had once told her at 7 years old, in a hospital emergency room with a bloody forehead, Isabella, when you grow up, you will be the strongest woman in this family, and they will hate you for it. She slid her hand through the crook of Dante Ricci's arm. The muscle beneath his suit was solid iron. Yes, she said. Let's go inside. They crossed the terrace together. Vivian and Preston stepped back to let them pass, and neither of them said a word, and Bella did not look at either of them as she walked by. Dante pushed open the French doors with his free hand, and the light and the music and the perfume swept over her like a wave, and she walked into her sister's engagement party on the arm of the most dangerous man on the eastern seaboard, and she did not, for the first time in her life, feel small. The ballroom did not go silent all at once. It went silent in a ripple, the way a pond goes silent when a heron lands on the far bank and the frogs closest to it stop singing first, and the silence spreads outward in slow, concentric circles until every living thing on the water has understood that something has arrived. The women near the champagne tower stopped talking first. Then the men at the bar. Then the string quartet, whose second violinist glanced up, faltered, recovered, and then faltered again as her eyes tracked the man in the midnight blue suit crossing the marble floor. By the time Bella and Dante had reached the center of the room, the orchestra on the mezzanine had trailed off entirely, and 300 of the Northeast's most powerful people were standing in absolute pin-drop silence, watching Isabella Whitmore, the fat daughter, the disappointment, the quirk, walk arm in arm with a man that half of them recognized and the other half were about to. Bella felt the weight of it. She did not shrink. She lifted her chin the way her grandmother had taught her to lift it 15 years ago, and she walked, and she felt Dante's arm steady beneath her hand, and she understood, with a clarity that felt almost holy, that she had spent 29 years being small in this room, and she was never going to be small in it again. Catherine Whitmore saw them from across the ballroom. She was standing near the ice sculpture, mid-sentence with Marjorie Blackwell, and Bella watched her mother's face do something Bella had never seen it do before. It broke. For one full second, Catherine Whitmore's carefully preserved 45-year-old face broke into the 61-year-old face of a woman who had just seen a ghost. Then the mask snapped back into place, faster than any Swiss dermatologist could have managed, and Catherine set down her champagne flute on a passing waiter's tray and began walking toward them with the fixed smile of a woman about to try to salvage a catastrophe she did not yet fully understand. Thomas Whitmore saw them from the bar. Bella's father was 64 years old, silver-haired, tall, still handsome in the specific weathered way of men who had spent 40 years lying to shareholders. He was holding a glass of Macallan 25. When he saw his daughter walking across his ballroom on the arm of Dante Ricci, the glass slipped out of his hand. It shattered on the marble floor. The sound was very loud in the silent room. Thomas Whitmore did not appear to notice. He was staring at Dante with an expression Bella had never seen on her father's face in her entire life. It was terror. Naked, unguarded, absolute terror. Dante did not look at Thomas. Dante did not look at Catherine. Dante walked with Bella to the exact center of the ballroom, directly beneath the largest of the baccarat chandeliers, and he stopped, and he turned to face the assembled crowd, and he waited. He waited for exactly the amount of time it took for 300 people to understand that something extraordinary was about to happen, and that none of them were going to be permitted to look away from it. Ladies and gentlemen, Dante's voice was not loud. It did not need to be. The acoustics of the Whitmore Ballroom had been engineered in 1912 to carry a whisper to the mezzanine, and Dante Ricci's voice was not a whisper exactly, but it was pitched with the specific low authority of a man who had learned, somewhere along the way, that shouting was for men who could not afford silence. Forgive the intrusion. My name is Dante Ricci. Most of you know the name. Some of you have done business with my family. A few of you owe my family money, and I will speak with you privately later in the evening. A ripple of very quiet, very nervous laughter moved through the crowd. Nobody was quite sure whether they were allowed to laugh. Dante waited for it to die. I am here tonight as the guest of Miss Isabella Whitmore, whom I have had the honor of knowing for some time, and to whom I am, as of this evening, formally engaged. The ripple that moved through the crowd this time was not laughter. It was the collective inhalation of 300 people who had spent the last decade watching Isabella Whitmore be treated as an embarrassment by the family currently hosting them, and who were now recalibrating, in real time, the social hierarchy of the entire Eastern Seaboard. Catherine Whitmore had reached them. She was smiling. Her smile was very bright and very tight, and her pale gray eyes were doing something behind it that Bella had seen exactly twice in her life. Once when Catherine had been informed that Bella's grandmother had died, and once when Catherine had been told that her personal art dealer had been arrested for forgery. It was the look of a woman doing extremely rapid mathematics under extreme duress. Mr. Ricci. Catherine's voice was warm honey poured over broken glass. What a delightful surprise. Thomas did not mention that you would be joining us tonight. Your husband was not aware, Mrs. Whitmore. I preferred to introduce myself in a setting where I could also introduce myself to your daughter's chosen circle. I find these announcements go more smoothly when there is a proper audience. Announcements. Of the engagement. Yes. Dante turned his dark eyes on Catherine, and Catherine, who had spent 36 years staring down debutantes and dowagers and Manhattan gallery owners without flinching, took a small involuntary step backward. Mrs. Whitmore, I understand that you have spent a great many years cultivating a certain impression of your elder daughter among your social circle. I want you to understand, before this evening proceeds any further, that this impression is now revised. Isabella is not an embarrassment to this family. She is the only member of this family who is not an embarrassment to the country in which she was born. If you have not understood this before tonight, you will understand it before you go to bed. Am I making myself clear? Catherine Whitmore did not answer. Catherine Whitmore could not answer. Her mouth was open. No sound was coming out. Thomas Whitmore had crossed the ballroom. He arrived at his wife's shoulder, still pale, still visibly shaking, and he opened his mouth to say something, and Dante, without looking at him, without so much as turning his head, spoke one quiet sentence that closed Thomas Whitmore's mouth for the rest of the evening. Mr. Whitmore. Appendix C. Thomas Whitmore made a small strangled sound. He took a step backward. He put his hand on the edge of a nearby table to steady himself. He did not, for the remainder of the night, speak another word in the presence of his elder daughter. Bella watched all of this. She watched her mother's face, and her father's face, and the faces of 300 people who had spent 29 years assessing her as insufficient. She watched Preston Blackwell, who had come inside from the terrace 3 minutes after them, standing frozen near the French doors with an expression of dawning, sickening comprehension. She watched Vivian, standing beside him, tears beginning to track mascara down her perfect cheeks, because Vivian had realized, several seconds before anyone else in the room, that her engagement party had just ceased to be about her engagement. And Bella felt, rising up through the sapphire silk of her Valentino gown and the platinum chain of her grandmother's necklace and the 29 years of accumulated silence that had lived in her chest since she was 4 years old, a single hot, clean, unfamiliar sensation. It was not vengeance. It was not triumph. It was something quieter and older and infinitely more dangerous than either of those. It was the feeling of finally being seen. Dante turned to her. He lifted her hand, the one resting in the crook of his arm, and he brought it to his lips, and he pressed a slow, deliberate kiss to her knuckles in front of 300 witnesses. His dark eyes did not leave her face. Mia Regina, he said quietly, in a voice pitched only for her. Would you like to stay for the rest of the party, or would you like me to take you home? Bella looked around the ballroom one last time. She looked at her mother, silent for perhaps the first time in her life. She looked at her father, pale and shaking against a table. She looked at her sister, weeping into the shoulder of a fiancé who was already, visibly, calculating the cost of remaining engaged to a woman whose family had just fallen off the top of the Northeast social pyramid. She looked at the ice sculpture of twin swans, already beginning to melt under the chandeliers, water pooling on the marble beneath them. She looked back at Dante Ricci. Take me home, she said. They walked out of the ballroom the same way they had walked in, arm in arm, unhurried, through a sea of silent, staring guests who parted for them the way tall grass parts for a moving shadow. Bella did not look back. She did not need to. She could feel the eyes on her spine, 300 pairs of them, and she understood with the clean precision of an accountant closing a ledger that the woman who had walked into the Whitmore ballroom at 8:15 that evening was not the woman who was walking out at 9:02. That woman had died on the terrace. The woman leaving on Dante Ricci's arm was someone else entirely, and Bella was still, in that moment, learning her name. The Whitmore foyer was empty except for the 2 attendants at the coat check, and a single member of Dante's security detail, a tall, granite-faced man in a black suit with a coiled wire disappearing behind his left ear. He had been standing so still against the wall that Bella had not noticed him when she came down the staircase 2 hours earlier. He nodded once at Dante as they approached. Dante nodded back. No words were exchanged. Bella understood, somewhere in the back of her mind, that a great deal of communication was happening in this house that she had lived in for 29 years without ever noticing. Your coat, Miss Whitmore, the coat check girl said. She was perhaps 20 years old, and she had clearly been watching what happened in the ballroom through the open doors, because her hands were trembling as she held out Bella's cream cashmere wrap. Bella took it. Dante took it from her and settled it around her shoulders himself, his gloved hands lingering for the briefest moment at the base of her neck, adjusting the fabric with the specific care of a man who had spent a great deal of time thinking about exactly how he wanted to touch her for the first time. "Thank you," Bella said to the girl. Her voice was steady. She was proud of that. "Miss Whitmore." The girl's eyes were wide and very young. My grandmother worked for your grandmother. She used to say your grandmother said you were going to be the strongest woman in this family." Bella looked at her. For a moment she could not speak. Then she said, "Please thank your grandmother for me, and tell her that tonight she was right." The girl nodded. She did not smile exactly, but something moved in her face that looked very much like relief, as if she had been waiting a long time to say those words to somebody and had not been sure she would ever get the chance. The Bentley was waiting at the base of the front steps. It was matte black armored, with tinted windows so dark Bella could not see through them. A driver in a black suit and cap held the rear door open. Dante handed her in with the same old-world formality he had used to offer her his arm on the terrace, and then he walked around the back of the car and slid in beside her, and the door closed with a heavy, muffled thud that told her the plating was several inches thick. The Bentley pulled smoothly down the crushed shell driveway. Bella looked out the tinted window at the receding lights of the estate, at the strings of Edison bulbs and the white pavilions and the great limestone bulk of the house her great-grandfather had built with railroad money, and she felt exactly nothing. She had expected, if this moment ever came, if she ever finally walked away from Greenwich for Real, to feel something enormous. Grief or relief or triumph or terror. What she felt instead was the specific flat calm of a woman who has just closed a book she has been reading against her will for a very long time. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Manhattan. I have a residence on 5th Avenue overlooking the park. It is fully staffed and fully secure. There is a suite of rooms prepared for you. If at any point you decide you would prefer to sleep at your own apartment, my driver will take you there instead, and my security detail will remain on your floor until morning. This is your choice, Isabella. Every choice tonight is your choice." She looked at him. In the low blue glow of the Bentley's interior lights, his face was harder to read than it had been on the terrace. His gloved hands were folded on his lap. His dark eyes were watching her with the same patient stillness he had been giving her for the last hour, and Bella understood, with a small internal jolt, that Dante Ricci was afraid, not of anything outside the car, of her, of what she was going to decide. "Fifth Avenue," she said. He exhaled. It was a very small sound. He had been holding a breath she had not seen him take. "Thank you. You do not need to thank me for coming with you." "I do." He turned his head to look out the window at the passing trees of the Merritt Parkway. 2 years is a long time to want something, Isabella. It is longer when you are not certain the thing you want will ever want you back. She did not know what to say to that. She sat quietly beside him in the low blue light, and she watched the highway unspool beneath the Bentley's headlights, and after a while she reached across the leather seat, and very slowly took his gloved hand in hers. He did not move. He did not speak. He simply turned his hand over beneath hers so that their palms met, calfskin against her bare skin, and he wrapped his fingers around hers and held them, and they rode the rest of the way to Manhattan in a silence that was, for the first time in Isabella Whitmore's 29 years, not the silence of somebody hiding from somebody else. The residence on 5th Avenue occupied the top 3 floors of a pre-war building at 72nd Street, directly across from a park. The private elevator opened into a marble foyer the size of Bella's entire Upper West Side apartment. The ceilings were 16 feet high. The floors were black-veined white marble laid in a herringbone pattern. Along the far wall hung a single enormous oil painting, a 19th-century landscape of the Amalfi Coast at dusk, that Bella recognized immediately as the work of an Italian master she had studied in her one elective art history course at Columbia. It was, she was fairly certain, worth more than the entire Whitmore estate. "Rosa's cousin manages the household," Dante said as he stepped out of the elevator behind her. "Her name is Elena. She is expecting you." Bella turned. Rosa. My Rosa? From the estate. Yes. Rosa has been quietly employed by me for the past 18 months. She has been reporting nothing about your family that was not directly relevant to your safety. She was the one who told me, 6 weeks ago, that your mother was planning tonight's toast. She was the one who told me you would wear the sapphire. Bella stared at him. She thought about Rosa's hands taking hers in the bedroom. She thought about Rosa saying, "You remember whose granddaughter you are." She thought about the small silver tray with the glass of ice water and the specific, careful tenderness with which Rosa had straightened the collar of her Valentino gown. And she understood that she had not, in fact, been alone in that house for the last 18 months. She had been watched over. She had been protected. She had been, quietly and without her knowledge, kept alive by a network of people whose names she was only now beginning to learn. You had her spying on my family. I had her spying on your family. Yes. I want you to know this, Isabella, because I do not want you to find it out later and feel that I have deceived you. Rosa was recruited 18 months ago. She has been paid a salary that will let her retire comfortably whenever she chooses. She agreed to the arrangement because she loved your grandmother, and because she has loved you since you were 7 years old with a bandage on your forehead, and because she had watched for 22 years what your mother was doing to you, and she wanted, when the opportunity came, to help stop it. I did not force her. I asked her. She said yes before I finished the sentence. Bella did not cry. She had cried her allotment for the evening, and something in her chest had gone quiet and clear and steady since the terrace, as if a door had closed on the part of her that used to weep at the smallest cruelty. But she took a long breath, and then another, and she said, I want to see her. I want Rosa to work here. Not for you. For me. I want her to have a room. I want her to be safe. I want her to know I know. Done. I will send a car for her tomorrow morning. Anything else? Yes. I want to see the contract again. Dante did not question it. He simply nodded, walked past her into a room off the foyer, and returned 30 seconds later with the same cream-colored paper she had read on the terrace. He handed it to her. She unfolded it. She read it again, this time slowly, this time with the full trained attention of a forensic accountant looking at a legal document. She noted the choice of Zurich as the drafting jurisdiction. She noted the specific banking authority whose seal was affixed. She noted the escape clauses her father had failed to negotiate for himself. She noted that Dante's attorneys had structured the debt in such a way that the moment Thomas Whitmore attempted any form of retaliation against her, against Dante, or against Dante's holdings, the entire $42 million would come due within 96 hours, with the crimes in Appendix C released simultaneously to the Securities and Exchange Commission and to the United States Attorney for the Southern District of New York. She folded the contract back along its creases. She looked up at him. Appendix C. What is in it? Everything. Wire fraud stretching back to 1996. Securities manipulation. 2 counts of tax evasion large enough to constitute felony. A pattern of racketeering related to real estate transactions in 3 states. And a small, very interesting file regarding a hit-and-run accident in 1989 on a road in Fairfield County, in which a woman named Delia Marsh died and Thomas Whitmore was driving. Bella did not sit down, but her hand went out to the console table beside her, and she gripped its edge. 1989. You were 3 months old. Your mother was in the car. He killed a woman. He killed a woman, and he paid a police officer $11,000 in cash to lose the report, and the officer kept a copy of the report in a safe deposit box in Bridgeport for 36 years as insurance against your father. And 6 months ago that officer's grandson came into possession of the box and did not know what he had, and I bought it from him for a great deal more than $11,000. And it is now in a fireproof safe in the sublevel of this building along with everything else in Appendix C. Bella was quiet for a long time. The clock in the foyer, an 18th century French mantelpiece under a bell jar of glass, ticked softly on a table by the wall. Somewhere deeper in the residence, a woman's voice, presumably Elena's, spoke a few soft words in Italian to somebody Bella could not see. I want to read Appendix C, Bella said at last. All of it. Tomorrow. In full. I want to see every document. I want to understand exactly what my father is. I have earned that. You have. And when I have read it, I want to decide what happens to him. Not you. Me. Dante inclined his head 1 fractional inch. The same gesture he had used with Preston Blackwell on the terrace. Yes, Mia Regina. She looked at him. She looked at this man she had known for exactly 1 hour and 17 minutes. This dangerous, patient, terrifying man who had been watching her from the back of a car for 2 years and who had built, in the shadows, an entire architecture of leverage designed for the sole purpose of standing on a terrace tonight and telling her the truth. And she felt something move in her chest that was not, quite yet, love. Because love was not something Isabella Whitmore was in the habit of feeling toward strangers. But it was adjacent to love. It was the raw material out of which love, in the right conditions and with enough time, might be built. "Show me my rooms," she said. "I want to sleep. Tomorrow is going to be a long day." Her rooms occupied the eastern wing of the top floor. There was a bedroom the size of a small library, with a canopied bed in dark cherry wood dressed in ivory silk sheets, and a sitting room with a fireplace already lit, and a private terrace overlooking the park, and a bathroom done in cream calicut marble, with a soaking tub deep enough to swim in. And there was, off the bedroom, a walk-in closet. Bella opened the door of the closet, and she stopped. It was not a closet. It was a boutique. 3 walls of custom shelving in pale ash wood held rows of shoes, arranged by color, all in her size, all with the low, sensible heels she preferred. A long row of hanging garments filled the 4th wall. She reached out and touched the sleeve of a gown, a deep emerald velvet, and she saw the label sewn into the collar, and it was her name. Not Ricci, not Whitmore, just Isabella, in a fine gold thread, on a garment cut specifically for her measurements by a designer whose atelier in Paris did not, as far as Bella knew, take walk-in commissions. She walked slowly down the row. Zuhair Murad, Elie Saab, Christian Siriano, Oscar de la Renta, Valentino. She counted 42 garments. There were day dresses in soft crepe and heavy silk, evening gowns in colors she had never allowed herself to wear because her mother had told her, when she was 15, that fat girls in bright colors looked like circus tents. There was a coat, a long wool coat in dove gray, that made her stop entirely, because it was cut exactly like the Max Mara coat she had given to Delphine on 5th Avenue 2 years ago. She stood very still in the middle of the closet, and she looked at all of it. And she understood that this had not been assembled in the last 7 months, since the contract was signed. This had been assembled over 2 years. Somewhere in Paris and Milan and New York, small teams of tailors had been quietly measuring garments to specifications provided by a man they had never met about a woman they had never seen, and every one of these garments had been made in the specific hope that a woman named Isabella Whitmore would, one day, come home and open a closet door and find them waiting for her. She turned. Dante was standing in the doorway of the closet, his gloved hands folded in front of him. He had not stepped inside. He had, she realized, been waiting to see how she reacted before he came any closer. "You made all of this. I commissioned all of this." "Yes. For 2 years. For 2 years. You did not know I would come. I did not know you would come. I made them anyway. I would have kept making them. If you had not come tonight, I would have kept commissioning garments in your size for the rest of my life, and I would have given them to a women's shelter in your name every Christmas, because it would have been the only way I could think of to love you without frightening you." She could not breathe. She sat down on the small ivory bench in the middle of the closet because her knees had stopped working, and she put her face in her hands, and for the second time that evening she cried. But this crying was different. This crying was not the sharp, humiliated leaking of a woman who had been mocked at a party. This was the deep, shuddering release of a woman who had spent 29 years being told she was too much, and who had just walked into a room and discovered that somebody, for 2 years, had been quietly building a world around the exact dimensions of her. Dante did not move. He did not come to her. He waited in the doorway of the closet with his gloved hands folded, and he let her weep, and he did not fill the silence with anything at all. It was, Bella realized somewhere in the middle of her tears, the single most respectful act any man had ever performed in her presence. He was letting her feel it. He was not trying to fix it. He was simply standing there being real, and letting her be real too. When she had finished, she wiped her face with the heels of her hands, and she looked up at him, and she said, "Come here." He came. He crossed the closet in 3 unhurried strides, and he stopped in front of her, and she reached up and took his gloved hand, and she pulled the glove off, slowly, finger by finger. His hand beneath was not what she had expected. She had expected the manicured softness of a man who lived in bespoke suits. She got, instead, a working hand. It was broad and strong, with old white scars across the knuckles and a thin, silvery line running down the side of his thumb, and the calluses of a man who had spent a great deal of his life doing things with his hands that he did not talk about at dinner parties. She turned his palm up, and she pressed her cheek into it. His fingers curved gently around the side of her face. 2 years, she said, into his hand. 2 years, Mia Regina. You will tell me everything. Every day, for the rest of my life. You will not hide from me. You will not soften things for me. You will not decide for me what I can hear. If we are going to do this, you have to promise me that. I promise you that. And I will do the same for you. Yes. She lifted her face from his palm. She looked up at him. He was looking down at her, and the expression in his dark eyes was one she was going to spend a great deal of the next 50 years learning to read. But she caught, in that moment, the essential shape of it, which was reverence. Not lust. Not possession. Reverence. It was the look of a man who had just been permitted to enter a cathedral he had been walking around the outside of for 2 years. "Kiss me," she said. "Once. I want to know what it feels like before I sleep." He knelt. He knelt in front of the ivory bench in the middle of the closet in his midnight blue Seville rose suit, and he put his unloved hand along the side of her jaw, and he leaned in slowly, giving her every possible opportunity to change her mind. And he kissed her. It was not what she had expected. It was not urgent or hungry or performative. It was slow and careful and unbearably tender. And it tasted faintly of the whiskey he had been drinking on the terrace and of something clean and warm beneath it. And it lasted perhaps for seconds. And when he drew back, his forehead rested against hers for a moment before he stood, and neither of them spoke. He walked to the door of the closet. He stopped there. "Elena is down the hall if you need anything in the night. My rooms are on the floor below. There is a house phone by the bed. Dial 1. I will come at any hour, for any reason, or for no reason at all. Sleep, Isabella." Dante. He turned. "Thank you for the gray coat." Something crossed his face that she did not quite have a name for. He inclined his head. He closed the door. Bella sat on the ivory bench in the middle of the closet for a long time after he left. She looked at the row of garments, at the dove gray coat, at the shoes arranged in perfect gradients of color, at the 2 years of quiet love that had been sewn stitch by stitch into the walls around her. Then she stood and she walked to the bedroom, and she unzipped the sapphire Valentino gown, and she stepped out of it and left it in a soft blue puddle on the marble floor, and she put on a silk nightgown someone, presumably Elena, had laid out on the foot of the bed. She climbed under the ivory sheets. She turned out the light. She slept, for the first time in 29 years, without dreaming of her mother's voice. She woke to sunlight, Manhattan sunlight, thin and gold and slanting through the tall east-facing windows across the park. For one confused moment she did not know where she was, and then she remembered, and the memory arrived all at once, the terrace and the contract and the ballroom and the gray coat and the kiss in the closet, and she lay very still under the ivory sheets and let it settle in her chest until it felt solid. There was a soft knock at the door. "Come in." The door opened. A woman in her early 50s stepped through, carrying a silver tray. She had dark hair swept up in a neat chignon, warm olive skin, and the specific competent air of a woman who had been running expensive households for a very long time. "Miss Isabella, I am Elena. Good morning." "Good morning, Elena. I have brought coffee, fresh fruit, brioche, and a soft-boiled egg. Mr. Ricci said you were not to be woken, but that when you woke, breakfast should be immediate. Where would you like it?" "The terrace, please." "And Elena." "Thank you." Elena inclined her head 1 fractional inch, and Bella recognized the gesture. and she understood that this small, precise nod was something the people in Dante Ricci's household did, and that she was, as of this morning, one of the people they did it for. She ate her breakfast on the terrace, overlooking the park in a heavy ivory silk robe she found hanging on the back of the bathroom door. The park was beginning to turn, the maples going gold, and a jogger was moving slowly along the reservoir path far below her, and somewhere a taxi was honking. And it was a completely ordinary Manhattan Sunday morning, and Bella sat in the sunlight and ate a brioche and thought, in the specific, clean voice she used inside her own head when she was working through a difficult forensic problem, about what she was going to do next. At exactly 10 o'clock, her phone rang. It was still in her clutch, which someone, presumably Elena, had brought up to the bedroom and set on the vanity. Bella retrieved it. The screen said Mother. She looked at it for 6 full rings. Then, on the 7th ring, she answered. Isabella. Catherine Whitmore's voice was not the voice from last night. Last night's voice had been warm honey over broken glass. This morning's voice was the voice of a woman who had spent the last 12 hours doing extremely rapid mathematics and had arrived at a number she did not like. Darling, we need to talk. Do we? Isabella, please. Whatever that man told you last night, you cannot possibly understand the full context. Your father and I are on our way into the city. We will be at your apartment in an hour. We need to sit down like a family and discuss this properly, before things go any further. I am not at my apartment. There was a pause on the line. It lasted 3 seconds. Bella listened to her mother recalibrate. Where are you, Isabella? 5th Avenue and 72nd. You are at his residence. I am. Isabella. Catherine's voice went low and tight. Come home. Immediately. Take a taxi. I will send Marcus for you if you cannot manage a cab. Whatever that man has told you, whatever contract he has shown you, it is not what you think. Your father made arrangements for your protection. That is all. You have misunderstood the nature of the agreement. Come home and your father will explain everything, and we will fix this. Do you understand me? Mother. Yes, darling. I have already read the contract. I have already read Appendix C. I have already read the police report from 1989. The silence on the line this time lasted much longer. Bella did not fill it. She had learned, at some point in the last 14 hours, that silence was a currency, and she had decided she was going to start spending it. Isabella, Catherine said at last, and her voice had changed again, and this time it was smaller and thinner and older. Whatever you think you know, whatever he has shown you, we can discuss this. You are my daughter. I am your daughter. Yes. And I have been your daughter for 29 years. And in 29 years, you have called me fat. You have called me embarrassing. You have called me a disappointment. You have called me your little quirk. And last night in front of 300 people you toasted to my unfortunate circumstances. I am your daughter. I have always been your daughter. It has never made any difference to how you have treated me. And it does not make any difference to me now. I will see you and Father at a time and place of my choosing, when I have finished reading every document in Appendix C. Until then, Mother, please do not call me again. Isabella. Goodbye, Mother. She hung up. She set the phone face down on the terrace table. She poured herself another cup of coffee. Her hand did not shake. Behind her, the terrace door opened. She did not turn. She knew, from the specific quiet of the footfall and the specific quiet of the presence, who it was. Rosa is here, Dante said. She arrived 20 minutes ago. She is in the kitchen with Elena. She would very much like to see you when you are ready. Bella closed her eyes. Give me 5 minutes. Take as many as you need, Mia Regina. She heard him turn. She heard him pause in the doorway. Isabella. Yes. Your mother is going to make 3 more calls in the next 20 minutes. Then your father. Then your sister. Then, at approximately 2 in the afternoon, the family attorney. Then, by tomorrow morning, an emissary from the Blackwell family will attempt to contact you privately to discuss whether Preston might reconsider his choice of bride. I am not marrying Preston Blackwell. I did not think you were. I only wanted you to know what was coming, so that none of it takes you by surprise. Thank you. The door closed softly behind him. Bella opened her eyes. She looked out over the park, gold and green in the morning sun, and she thought about her grandmother, dead 15 years, who had once told her at 7 years old, in a hospital emergency room with a bloody forehead, that when she grew up she would be the strongest woman in the Whitmore family, and they would hate her for it. "You were right, Nana," she said quietly to the empty terrace. "You were right about all of it." Then she stood up, and she went inside to see Rosa, and the day began. Rosa was standing in the kitchen with a coffee cup in her weathered hands when Bella walked in, and the moment the older woman looked up and saw her, Rosa set the cup down on the marble counter, and she walked across the room, and she took Bella into her arms without a single word being spoken between them. Bella folded into her. She was 3 inches taller than Rosa and outweighed her by nearly 100 pounds. But she folded into the older woman's shoulder the way a very small child folds into the only safe place it has ever known, and Rosa's hand came up and cupped the back of her head, and they stood in the middle of Dante Ricci's Fifth Avenue kitchen in the thin gold light of a Sunday morning, and neither of them spoke for a long time. "You knew," Bella said at last into Rosa's shoulder. "I knew, Mija. I knew for 18 months, and I could not tell you. And there is not a single night in those 18 months that I did not go to bed praying you would understand when the time came." "I understand." Rosa drew back. Her dark eyes were wet, but her mouth was set in the same firm line Bella had seen on her 1,000 times in the Whitmore house, the specific line of a woman who had spent 31 years watching a family destroy itself and had decided, at some point along the way, that she was going to save the one member of it worth saving. "He is a good man, Isabella. I know what he is. I know what his family is. I know what people say about the Ricci name in this city. And I am telling you, on the memory of your grandmother, whom I loved, that this man is a good man. He is not a soft man. He is not a gentle man. But he is a good man, and he loves you, and he has loved you for 2 years, and he has never once in all that time done a single thing to make me question whether he deserved to." Bella nodded. She did not have words for what she was feeling. She simply took Rosa's hand and held it, and she stood in the kitchen while Elena moved quietly around them, making a fresh pot of coffee, and after a while she found she was able to speak again. "I want you to live here, Rosa. I want you to have a room. I want you to not work. I want you to sit in the sun and read and drink coffee and be old and cared for, and I want to see you every morning for the rest of your life." Rosa laughed. It was a real laugh, wet and warm. "Mija, I will live here. I will have a room, but I will not sit. I am 63, not 93. I will make you breakfast, and I will fold your clothes the way I like them folded, and I will scold you when you skip lunch. This is not negotiable." "This is not negotiable," Bella agreed. The rest of that first day at Fifth Avenue moved with the specific slow gravity of a woman rebuilding herself out of load-bearing pieces. Bella spent the morning in Dante's private study on the sublevel, a windowless room paneled in dark walnut with a single long table at its center and a fireproof safe set into the far wall behind a false bookcase. Dante had the safe open when she arrived. Inside were 7 manila folders, each labeled in a neat black hand. She sat down at the long table. He sat across from her. He did not speak. He simply passed her the folders one at a time, in the order he thought she should read them, and he let her read. She read for 4 hours. She read the wire fraud. She read the securities manipulation. She read the 2 counts of tax evasion, each large enough on its own to send Thomas Whitmore to federal prison for the remainder of his natural life. She read the racketeering documentation, 3 states thick, involving real estate transactions that had displaced 240 low-income families over the course of a decade. She read the police report from Fairfield County, dated the 11th of April, 1989, describing the death of a 31-year-old woman named Delia Marsh, struck by a black Mercedes on a rural road at 11:47 at night. She read the officer's private notes. She read the deposit records showing $11,000 in cash paid into a bank account in Bridgeport 3 days later. She read the copy of the original report, the one that had been suppressed, that named Thomas Whitmore as the driver and Catherine Whitmore, 3 months postpartum, as the passenger. When she had finished the last document, she closed the folder, and she sat for a long time with her hands flat on the walnut table. And she did not cry. There was nothing left in her to cry with. What she felt instead was the specific clarity of a woman looking at a spreadsheet whose numbers had finally reconciled, at the exact truth she had been circling for 6 years without quite letting herself see. Delia Marsh, she said. Did she have family? A husband? A 3-year-old daughter? The husband died of cancer in 2004. The daughter is 39 now. She lives in Hartford. She is a public defender. Her name is Marguerite Marsh, and she has spent her entire adult life not knowing what happened to her mother, because the official record says the driver was never identified and the case was closed unsolved in 1992. I want her to know. Yes. I want her to know before my father does anything else in the world. I want her to be the first. Yes, Mia Regina. And then I want the file to go to the United States Attorney. All of it. Every folder. And I want to sign the referral myself. Dante watched her across the walnut table. His dark eyes were very still. Isabella, you understand what happens to your family if that file is delivered. Your father goes to prison for the rest of his life. Your mother is very probably charged as an accessory in the 1989 matter and does at least 10 years. Your sister loses everything. The Whitmore name ends. There is no coming back from Appendix C. Once it leaves this room, it does not stop moving. I understand. Take a day. Take a week. There is no clock on this. There is a clock on this. There has been a clock on this since 1989. Marguerite Marsh is 39 years old, and she has not known for 36 years who killed her mother. Every day that clock has been running. It stops this week. He did not argue. He inclined his head 1 fractional inch, and Bella understood that she had, in that moment, become the person in the room who made the decisions about the Whitmore file, and that Dante Ricci had, without hesitation, ceded that ground to her the moment she asked for it. She met Marguerite Marsh on a Tuesday afternoon in a private room at a law firm on Park Avenue. Marguerite was a small, sharp-featured woman with her mother's dark hair and her father's tired eyes. Bella brought the file herself. She brought Rosa because Rosa had asked to come. She did not bring Dante. This was not, she had decided, a room for Dante Ricci. She sat across a small conference table from Marguerite Marsh, and she told her what her father had done in 1989, and she watched a woman who had been carrying an unresolved grief for 36 years finally set it down. Marguerite did not scream. She did not weep dramatically. She simply closed her eyes, and she breathed for a very long time, and when she opened her eyes again, she said quietly, "Thank you for coming yourself. It matters that you came yourself." "I am so sorry," Bella said. "I am so sorry for what he did. I am so sorry for the 36 years. I am so sorry that this is how you found out. It is not your apology to make." "I know. I am making it anyway." Marguerite reached across the small table. She took Bella's hand. Her grip was surprisingly firm. "My mother was a kindergarten teacher, Miss Whitmore. She loved sunflowers. She used to sing to me in French because her grandmother had been from Marseille. I want you to know these things about her. I want somebody in your family to know these things about the woman he killed." "I will know them," Bella said. "I will know them for the rest of my life." The file went to the United States Attorney on a Thursday. Bella signed the referral herself, in Dante's study on the sublevel, in the presence of 2 of his attorneys and a notary flown in from Zurich. She used her full legal name. She dated it. She did not hesitate. When the notary had left, Dante poured her a glass of very old whiskey, and she drank it in 3 swallows, and she did not, for the rest of that evening, speak. The federal agents arrived at the Whitmore estate on a Saturday morning, exactly 2 weeks after Bella had walked out of the ballroom on Dante Ricci's arm. Bella watched it on the news, sitting on the ivory silk sofa in the sitting room of her suite on Fifth Avenue, with Rosa beside her and a cup of coffee going cold on the table in front of her. The helicopter footage showed her father being walked out of the front door in handcuffs, still in his silk pajamas, his silver hair uncombed. It showed her mother being escorted separately from a side entrance, in a robe, her face without makeup for what was probably the first time in front of a camera in 40 years. Catherine Whitmore did not turn her head toward the cameras. She did not weep. She walked with her chin up and her back straight. And even in that moment, Bella felt a small, unwelcome flicker of something almost like respect. Her mother had been, if nothing else, consistent to the end. Vivian was not arrested. Vivian had committed no crimes. Vivian was simply, that same Saturday morning, informed by Preston Ashford Blackwell 3 via text message that the engagement was regretfully to be considered concluded, and by the Whitmore family attorney via phone call that the family accounts had been frozen pending the federal investigation, and by her landlord in Tribeca via email that the November rent had bounced. By Monday morning, Vivian had moved into a Marriott in New Rochelle on her personal credit card. By Wednesday morning, the personal credit card had also stopped working. By Friday, Vivian had called Bella 19 times, and Bella had answered exactly 0 of them. And Vivian had left, on the 19th voicemail, a long, wet, choking apology that Bella listened to once, in Dante's study, with Rosa in the doorway, and then deleted without responding. "You are not required to forgive her," Rosa said quietly. "You are not required to forgive any of them. I know. There will be people in your life who tell you it is Christian to forgive. There will be people who tell you it is healthy to forgive. There will be people who tell you that forgiveness is for you and not for them. Some of those people will be right in the general and wrong in the specific. Your mother spent 29 years telling you that you were less than you were. There is no debt she can pay that erases that. You may, one day, decide to speak to your sister again. You may not. Either choice is honorable. Do not let anyone tell you otherwise, Mija. I will not." The wedding was on a Saturday in June, 9 months after the terrace at Greenwich. Bella did not want a large event. She had walked into 300 pairs of judging eyes at the last party she had attended, and she had no interest in doing it again for her own. Dante, who had turned out in the intervening 9 months to possess a surprising and often disarming capacity for restraint, agreed without argument. They were married in the garden of a private estate in the Hudson Valley, in front of 46 guests. Rosa was one of them. Elena was one of them. Marguerite Marsh was one of them, at Bella's specific and quiet insistence. And Marguerite came, and she wore a yellow dress the color of sunflowers, and she wept once, briefly, during the vows, and Bella caught her eye across the garden and understood exactly why she was weeping and loved her for it. Bella wore a gown of ivory silk that had been made for her by the same atelier in Paris that had made the 42 garments in the closet on Fifth Avenue. It had a sweetheart neckline and a corseted bodice and a full sweeping skirt, and it was cut, like everything else in her life now, for the exact dimensions of her body. And she did not, on the walk down the garden path toward the man in the dove-gray morning suit at the end of it, feel large or small or fat or thin. She felt, for the first time in her life at a formal event, simply the correct size, which was to say, her own. Dante's hands trembled when he took hers under the arbor. Bella noticed. She was probably the only person present who noticed. She squeezed his fingers once, and he steadied, and he said his vows in a low, gravelly voice that carried exactly as far as it needed to, and no further. He said, among other things, that he had spent 36 years believing he was not the sort of man who was permitted to have this, and that he understood, now, that this had always been a story he had told himself and never a truth about the world, and that the woman standing across from him had taught him the difference, and that he intended to spend every remaining day of his life earning the correction. Bella said, in her own vows, that she had spent 29 years believing she was too much, and that the man standing across from her had, without ever once asking her to shrink, made her understand that she was, in fact, exactly the amount of woman she had always been meant to be, and that this understanding was not a gift he had given her, but a mirror he had held up until she could finally see herself in it, and that she loved him for holding the mirror steady, and that she would spend every remaining day of her life holding one up for him in return. Rosa cried through the entire ceremony. Marguerite cried once. Elena did not cry, because Elena did not cry, but she smiled the entire time, and Bella caught it twice and smiled back both times. They did not go on a honeymoon immediately. There was too much still unfinished. Thomas Whitmore was in federal custody in Otisville, awaiting trial on charges that were expected to result in a life sentence. Catherine Whitmore was in a facility in Danbury on a plea deal that would keep her there until she was 78. Vivian, at last report, was living in a two-bedroom rental in Stamford with a roommate and working as an assistant at a small events company, and had, according to a brief report from one of Dante's people, begun attending a support group for adult children of high-control families. Bella did not follow the details closely. She had, at some point in the winter, made her peace with not knowing. Some doors, she had decided, did not need to be reopened simply because they could be. The Whitmore estate was sold at auction in October. The proceeds, after the federal government had taken its share, went into a trust in the name of Delia Marsh, administered by Marguerite, funding scholarships for the children of women killed by drivers who had never been identified. Bella had insisted on the structure. Dante had drafted the paperwork. Marguerite had wept when she was told, and had then agreed, and had then, at Bella's specific request, hung a framed photograph of her mother in the Trust's small office on Farmington Avenue in Hartford, so that every scholarship recipient who ever walked through the door would see the face of the woman whose death had, 36 years later, made their education possible. Bella did not go to see the estate before it was sold. She decided, seen enough of it. Rosa went once quietly to say goodbye to the kitchen where she had worked for 31 years and to collect a small ceramic figurine of a saint that had belonged to her mother and had lived, for 3 decades, on the sill above the sink. She brought the figurine back to Fifth Avenue and put on the sill above the sink of the kitchen there, and Bella walked in the next morning and saw it and stopped, and Rosa, watching from the doorway with a coffee cup in her hand, said, "Some things are worth carrying with you, Mija. Even from bad houses, you take what was good, and you leave the rest, and you do not apologize for either." Bella nodded. She kissed Rosa on the top of her head. She poured herself a cup of coffee. She went out onto the terrace to sit in the sun. Dante found her there an hour later. He had a folder in his hand. He sat down beside her and set the folder on the table between them. She looked at it. She looked at him. "What is this?" "This is the last one." "The last what?" "The last piece of unfinished business. Preston Blackwell filed suit against you last week. He is claiming that you defamed him by association during the arrest of your father, and that his family's pharmaceutical stock has lost value as a result. His attorneys sent this over on Friday. I did not want to bring it to you until after the wedding. I am bringing it to you now." Bella looked at the folder. Then she looked out over the park. It was late June. The trees were fully green. A woman was walking a small terrier along the reservoir path. Somewhere far below, a taxi was honking. "Dante." "Yes." "Do you know what I'm going to say?" "I have a guess." "Say it then." He smiled. It was the small private smile she had, over 9 months, come to understand was the one he saved for her and for nobody else in the world. "You are going to say, throw it away." "Throw it away." "Yes, Mia Regina. He is not important enough to fight. He is not important enough to notice. If his stock has lost value, it is because his family manufactures overpriced medications and hires men like him to run them. I did not defame Preston Blackwell. Preston Blackwell has been defaming himself in public for 32 years. Let his attorneys write their letters. Let the case die on a desk somewhere. Throw it away." Dante picked up the folder. He looked at it for a moment. Then he stood, walked to the small bronze receptacle at the corner of the terrace, and dropped the folder into it. He came back and sat down beside her. He took her hand. They watched the woman with the terrier for a while. "Bella. Are you happy?" She thought about it. She did not answer immediately, because Isabella Whitmore Ricci had made herself a promise, on a terrace in Greenwich 9 months earlier, that she was never again going to answer a serious question with anything less than the full and honest truth. She sat in the sun with her husband's hand in hers, and she took inventory the way an accountant takes inventory, and she reviewed each column carefully, and when she had finished, she turned her head to look at him. "Yes," she said, "I am happy. I did not know until this morning that I had been waiting my entire life to be able to answer that question with that word. But yes, I am happy." He lifted her hand. He kissed her knuckles. He held her hand against his cheek for a long moment. Then he said, "Good. That is the only thing I ever wanted, Mia Regina. That was always the only thing." She sat there on the terrace on Fifth Avenue, in the late June sunlight, with her husband beside her and Rosa in the kitchen behind her, and the whole shape of her real life laid out in front of her in every direction. And she thought about a 7-year-old girl on a bicycle, bleeding from her forehead in an emergency room, whose mother had told her that this was what happened to clumsy, fat little girls. She thought about that girl. She sent that girl, across the 22 years between them, the message that she wished someone had been able to send her at the time. You are not too much. You have never been too much. The people who told you that were building a cage out of your own body because they were afraid of what you would do if you ever realized the door was not locked. The door was never locked. It was never locked. And one day, when you are grown, you will walk through it, and on the other side there will be a garden, and a woman named Rosa, and a man in a dove-gray coat, and the exact life you were always meant to have. Hold on. It is coming. It is coming. And it is worth every year of the wait. She squeezed her husband's hand. He squeezed back. Somewhere in the city, church bells rang the noon hour. Somewhere in Hartford, a scholarship in the name of Delia Marsh was being awarded to a 19-year-old girl whose mother had been killed by a drunk driver in Waterbury in 2018. Somewhere in Stamford, a woman named Vivian was sitting in a folding chair in a church basement and beginning, slowly and painfully, the long work of understanding what she had been raised into. Somewhere in Otisville, a man named Thomas Whitmore was staring at a concrete wall, and somewhere in Danbury, a woman named Catherine Whitmore was doing the same. Somewhere in Greenwich, the great limestone house at the end of the crushed shell driveway sat empty, waiting for its next owner, and the strings of Edison bulbs had all been taken down, and the ice sculptures had long since melted, and the ballroom, at that exact moment, was silent. And on a terrace on Fifth Avenue, high above Central Park, Isabella Whitmore Ricci sat in the sunlight and finally, at 29 years and 9 months old, understood what her grandmother had been trying to tell her all those years ago, in an emergency room with a bloody forehead. She had always been the strongest woman in the family. It had just taken her this long to stop apologizing for it. The moral of this story is simple, and it is this. The people who tell you that you are too much are almost always telling you the truth about themselves. They are not describing your body, or your voice, or your ambition, or the space you take up in a room. They are describing the specific dimensions of what they cannot contain in themselves, and they are trying to shrink you down to a size their smallness can survive. Do not let them. The world does not need less of you. It has never needed less of you. It needs exactly the amount of you that you were born with, plus every ounce you have added to yourself in the years since, plus every ounce you are still going to add before you are done. And somewhere out there, whether you have met them yet or not, there is a person or a friend or a life that is not only capable of holding all of you, but has been waiting patiently in the dark for the day you finally walk through the door and let yourself be seen. Be seen. Let yourself be seen. The right people, when they find you, will not ask you to be smaller. They will build the room bigger. Did Isabella's transformation from the family embarrassment to the woman who brought down an empire give you the chills? If you cheered when she signed that referral, when she gave Marguerite the truth after 36 years, when she walked into that garden in ivory silk and finally understood she was exactly the right size, hit that like button and share this story with someone who needs to hear that they are not too much. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because the next story features a curvy pastry chef, a widowed Sicilian don with a 6-year-old daughter, and a betrayal that will unmake 3 families. Drop a comment below. Would you have signed the referral? Would you have forgiven your sister? Team Bella alone, or Team Dante and Rosa forever? Tell me. I read every one.